or any rules targeted towards just abuse cases. We're really focusing on abuse. And I'm wondering, are there procedural rules relating to how an abuse case navigates the dependency court system?
I don't think it's any different.
Okay.
I mean, I can't think of any.
There are no new procedural rules related to that.
Yeah. This slide's been up here for a while, and I just want to touch on it. Let's move on. Real quickly, we have 2 new judges in our county, and it came home to me very clearly as the AJ. Now I have to train them in all of this stuff, and one of the greatest things that we have is the bench book, which is a compilation of what we have considered best practices that kind of get people in a Reader's Digest sort of way up to speed really quickly on the important issues that they need to know that sometimes are counterintuitive. We touched on some of them. They're all listed for you there, and they're in your packet, but I wanted to just talk about one, which is One Judge, One Family. It's incredibly complicated in family court. People walk into different doors. Sometimes they come in because of protection from abuse. Sometimes they come in because of a dependency. Sometimes it's a custody case. Now, if they come in one door as a dependency case and we send the child to live with dad, for example, and mom walks in the next door in motions court and says, wait a minute, I had custody of my child and now dad has him. Please give me an emergency order to get my kids back. He took the kids. And those 2 systems didn't speak to each other. It's really problematic. We want not only the system to speak to each other, but the judges to be the same person so that we don't put kids back with abusive parents inadvertently. Nobody does this deliberately, but inadvertently it can happen. And so we're really working it really hard in Allegheny County to keep a case, no matter what it is, no matter what door you walk in, if it's the same family, you're in front of that judge and you figure out how to make it happen administratively. And I would commend that as you're talking to other people, because people like to shop. They think they can get a better answer sometimes.
So a lot of very good questions, but as you can see and you flip through, we have lots of slides, which we knew we would not get through. But I wanted to touch, now that we've talked a little bit about dependency court and you've heard what used to be and what is, just very quickly on the court improvement project. It's a federal grant that all states get. If the money must go to the highest court in your state, so all the Supreme Courts get this funding. For Pennsylvania, it's about $950,000 a year that goes to our Pennsylvania Supreme Court to improve dependency court practice and ancillary services to the court practice. Our Supreme Court Justice Liaison is Justice Max Baer, not surprisingly, was a judge in Allegheny County and is now a Supreme Court Justice. And we work very, very closely with Bev's office because the funding comes out of the Administration for Children and Families, which is the same federal office that funds child welfare services. Some time ago, that office took a look and said, you know, courts really impact what happens to abused and neglected kids, so maybe we should focus some attention on helping courts do as best a job as possible. And here are just some reasons, obviously, why they think courts need to be involved and we need to take a look at them. Gave you a slide, and this is just the highlight sort of pieces for Pennsylvania on court improvement. And really, court improvement statewide started back in 2004. Prior to that, the funding that came into Pennsylvania went to Philadelphia for a number of reasons, which I wasn't around then and don't know the details of, but primarily it funded model courts in Philadelphia. When Justice Max Baer was elected back in 2004, he wanted to do something about the child dependency system in the state. That was a big part of his campaign that he ran, and he was able to convince the rest of the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court should be leading this, and it shouldn't just be focusing on courts in Philadelphia, it should focus on courts across the Commonwealth, which it has done. I'm not going to read through all those other things because you could read them. A lot has happened in the years since Justice Baer has become the liaison. But one of the most important things, I think, is this, and that's the Children's Roundtable Initiative. When Justice Baer took over the responsibility of being the liaison justice, he sort of looked at Pennsylvania and saw there are 67 counties, 60 judicial districts, all functioning very independently. You know, sort of the history of Pennsylvania is that we didn't want big government telling us what to do. There was this local autonomy. And that probably worked well in the 1700s and 1800s where there wasn't internet and there wasn't mobility like there is now. Now we know families move from county to county to county, so may be involved with multiple systems and in multiple counties. And what Justice Baer initially did was he went to a state conference of trial judges. That happens twice a year. He got all the dependency judges together, told them we had to really improve what we're doing in dependency court. As you might imagine, all the dependency court judges said, absolutely, we want to do the best job we can. They went back to their counties, and what was waiting for them was caseloads and dockets and things, and they just couldn't do what the change that they wanted to do. So a couple of things happened. First, my office was created within the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts because the thinking was we needed some support outside of the counties to help pull the entire structure together. And second was there needed to be a communication structure, a decision-making body in the court side of government, and we didn't have that for dependency. Justice Baer shares a story where he was at a meeting and Judge Kevin Dougherty, who's the administrative judge of Philadelphia County, was standing next to the administrative judge in, I think it was Montgomery County, and they were talking to each other. They had their court offices are 20 minutes away from each other. They had never been introduced to each other. They had no idea that they were administrative judges, and that's primarily because the job of the judge is to come to go to their chambers and hear cases. So what was created was the Children's Roundtable Initiative, and it's very specific how it was created. The Supreme Court asked all of the lead dependency judges in every county to create a local group that comes together and talks about dependency issues. The judge was to call the meeting because what we find is that when a judge sends a letter to people, people generally show up at the meeting. But the judge was to co-facilitate the meeting with the Children and Youth Administrator. So administratively, there is this collaboration and partnership. And you build a sort of an iron curtain, a wall between the administrative conversation and a case discussion. Judge and administrator can never talk about cases. That's a big no-no for everybody to do. But administratively, talking about the system, they should be talking to one another. So the Supreme Court asks counties to do this. The next piece, and this is the piece that I don't think any other state has in the nation, at least not any state that I've been to or talked to, and it's an intermediary level of communication. And it's called the Leadership Roundtables. Leadership Roundtables meet in the spring and the fall of every year. And it brings together the judge, the Children and Youth Administrator, and one additional person from their local Children's Roundtable to that meeting to talk amongst like-sized counties. There are 7 leadership roundtables for the state of Pennsylvania, and counties are grouped together by their size. Thinking behind that was like-sized counties would have like-sized concerns and hopefully share like-sized solutions. So those folks come together in the spring and in the fall. In the summer, it's usually the last week of May, we have the highest level of the structure, and that's the State Roundtable. State Roundtable meets once a year. It started off meeting a half day, about 6 hours, so a little more than a half day. It is now a 2-day meeting because there's so much on their agenda. But that group is co-chaired by the Deputy Secretary for the Office of Children, Youth, and Families, so Bev Macaret now, Supreme Court Justice Max Baer, and me. And we lead the discussion of that group. It's about between 50 and 60 people who come together for 2 days to really talk through what they see as challenges and concerns and possible solutions for Pennsylvania. You have a brochure in your packet that actually shows this structure and talks a little bit more about it, and also talks about the different issues that State Roundtable is addressing. Is anything on that?
I just want to say that State Roundtable is a hot ticket. You may not think that, but there are lots and lots of people who want to be on it. I kept raising my hand saying, I want to be on it, I want to be on it, for people who are really interested in child welfare.
And what's beautiful about it is that at your local Children's Roundtable, you may come up with an idea or a concern, and it will be raised at the State Roundtable. So it can come from the bottom up, but then also the State Roundtable, which has a bigger perspective, can also adopt new plans and ideas and bring it down to the local roundtable. So it's really a beautiful system of both up and down that you don't see very often.
In many states across the nation, when we were exploring what it should look like in Pennsylvania, what we saw are Supreme Courts who would put together a executive board, and folks got appointed to the executive board, and this group would meet periodically and come up with ideas, and then these sort of edicts would go out from the Supreme Court saying, do this. Justice Bear, having been administrative judge in Allegheny County, said that doesn't work really well, because when somebody who doesn't know who we are tells me how I need to fix it, sort of like family conferencing the judge talked about earlier, I might say on the surface, okay, I'll do it, but underneath I'm really not going to buy into it, I'm not going to do it. So this structure allows that local conversation and then a shared conversation amongst like sizes. And what actually happens, to add to what Judge Capriva said, the ideas are talked about at the local children's roundtable, elevate to the leadership roundtable. What I and my staff do is we attend all those leadership roundtables and we look for like common themes across the 7 roundtables. And the common themes make up the agenda of the state roundtable. So we're dealing with issues that aren't necessarily just Allegheny's issue or Blair County's issue or Lycoming. It's a joint or a central theme for most counties.
You're going with 80%.
Right, that 80%. Yeah.
Cindy, I know that you and Justice Bear have done a great job, and this is a phenomenal process. My question is, of the 67 counties and 60 judicial districts, how many are meaningfully engaged in this process at one level or another?
I would say about 80%. And there are some, and what I probably should add to that is the Supreme Court really has put no direction on this process locally, with the exception that it needs to be called by the judge, co-facilitated with the children youth. We felt very strongly that that partnership, administrative partnership, be identified. But if a local judge does not want to do it, the Supreme Court's not going to force them to do it. And now that doesn't mean, what that means is they're not going to get a letter from the Chief Justice saying, how come you haven't done that? It doesn't mean that my office doesn't stop going to those counties and still trying to convince them. It doesn't mean that Justice Bear and I haven't picked up the phone and called judges or called administrators and had conversations with them. It doesn't mean that Deb's office hasn't called them. But at the end of the day, if they say, I don't want to do it, forcing somebody to do a collaborative process doesn't work very well. But I would say the vast majority have. Last year, we host a Children's Summit every year, well, every other year now, where we ask counties to bring teams, and typically it has to include your dependency judge, your child welfare administrator, and then you can bring 3 other folks, teams of 5. Last year, we had 51 counties represented, and it's free. Our office pays for everything. We have 51 counties. When you think 51 counties out of 67, that was a little disappointing, except for those 51 counties made up 96% of the kids who were in placement. So it's where it becomes challenging is where you have courts where it's one judge and they're hearing everything in the county, and their dependency caseload might be 1 child. So to ask them to create this massive structure, and in a lot of those counties, they already have something that's meeting like this.
I would just say, as someone who's been since day one, I've seen a lot of growth. You know, at the beginning, there's only a small group of counties, and every year seems to be more and more counties buying in and getting into it. You know, you see that every year, that they're hearing how it's successful in other counties, and you know, that peer pressure tends to start to move. So it seems to keep expanding, and it's been quite successful that way.
One thing I try to keep in mind as a member of this task force is one of the things that brought us together was this tragedy at Penn State that brought to the level of consciousness to the whole country this unfortunate situation. And the question that many people continue to ask themselves is, how could this happen? Given the complexity and the depth of the professionals that are looking and working in this space, it is still happening. And one of the things that we're beginning to see is it wasn't 1 or 2 or 3 people. It was a lot of people. And as you peel the onion back, it was the missed opportunity with this police officer. It was the kid who didn't get representation over here. And there were a series of mistakes, not just 1 or 2 mistakes, as often is the case. So that if that's true, it seems to me one of the obligations that we have is to figure out a more efficient way to have this system work so that it's more responsive, we can track more accurately, we can provide the resources so that we can improve the predictability of the outcomes for these children and so on. That we use this tragedy as an opportunity to revise a system that may desperately be underfunded, may not have the level of professionals that it really needs, so that this series of mistakes ends up costing human lives. That's what I try to keep in mind in every one of these hearings. In a previous life, I used to fly airplanes for a living. And one of the things, if you look at the history of tragedies in the aviation industry, particularly when it was non-human, it was 100 small things that couldn't get done. The FAA guy that missed it because he was sick that day. The mechanic who overlooked it because he was in a hurry. And it was one thing after another. And if we could provide, at least as I would like to speak here, some thought that there could be a better system resource provided to ensure that we increase the likelihood that this will not happen again, I think we've done a job. But that's what I keep in mind, that with all the millions and all the systems and all the professionals that are actively involved, mainly good people, this still happens. And that's what we've got to keep people out of, and to avoid that ever happening. And I think that's what
Mr. Strickland, I've been thinking about that, how we might intersect with that and how it might happen. And the definition of dependency is a child who's out of the care and control of their parent. And so I was thinking, okay, in my courtroom, that a child who might have been a victim might be the child that I see who's now currently truant or sexually acting out, or perhaps there's some concern whether the parents of that child is truly watching out for that child. So it kind of comes from a side door place for us. It's not direct in my face that I would know that this child was being abused by someone he was at a camp with, unless I saw a symptom of that coming at me indirectly. And that's what's problematic. And we talked about this, about the difference between the General Protective Services cases and the Child Protective Services law. And maybe, Mark, you could just talk about that a little bit, because I think that was really significant, because that's really the bulk of our work would come at us indirectly. I wouldn't be identifying a Sandusky necessarily unless I saw a behavior in front of me that triggered, and then somehow we were able to get a child to disclose where abuse was occurring. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I know you dealt with some of this before around the CPS and the GPS and all that, but the bulk of what we do is General Protective Services. It's almost 90% of our action comes through the General Protective Service. Neglect, the Child Protective Service laws don't have that. The General Protective Service, in my mind, it's much more, it's the assessment, it's the risk, and it's the safety, and it's what goes going forward, as opposed to did somebody do it? Because that's an event that's occurred, it's over, and the CPS seems to be much more of did somebody do it, around that. And to the extent you go forward, in terms of what is the assessment, what's the look at, and then how do you deal with that in terms of services and spotting things, I think, you're much better served that way. Differential response, alternative response, those kind of things that can help your families. But I think as Judge Montecristo has said, it's where can we catch folks and to look at a broader view around some of this. And protecting children is a community responsibility. It's not government's responsibility. So where are the neighbors? Where are the folks next door? Who takes ownership? All of this kind of thing. Because there are folks that see kids 24/7. Government are not going to see them that way. So how do you buy in a much more different kind of look at this thing and be more broad around this kind of thing, and then maybe start to capture some of that as people become more aware. But it's a tough one.
Let me ask you, in the best of all possible worlds, one of the things at least that I'm thinking is that right now we have no record, no computer record, no track whatsoever of GPS.
Right.
And my thinking at least, and we're going to get into this hopefully in the next 2 days, is that there should be. That at least for police who are actively investigating any of the parents or other adults or the children involved in receiving services, for other child protectors, for the courts, there should be an ability to have a record of what services were provided and to whom. Any problem from you?
No, I've think absolutely makes a lot of sense, and I think you also should look at the CPS and the expungement laws.
Right.
Because you get rid of these, it's impossible, I shouldn't say impossible, but it's very difficult to substantiate and found, indicate cases. You see what a small percentage actually rise to that level, and if they're not, there's no record. It's like, and a lot of times where there's smoke, there's fire, there's things overall, you should at least have it as an assessment, So you don't take away somebody's job or their ability to make a living forever, but you have something internally that you can see, and track that kind of thing. So
Right.
CPS and GPS should be part of a record that you can look. Just like when we look at our data warehouse, we look at everything. So call comes in an intake, look up Mark Turner and find out, I just got out of county jail, or I'm in mental health services right now. So worker knows what they're walking into, as opposed to going in, cold with that kind of stuff. It's a really good tool to have, and I think that really does help, in terms of that stuff.
Terrific. So, and if I may ask, is there anybody here who either philosophically or practically, aside from the computers cost money and, nobody, good.
Especially because like in Lycoming County, within driving distance of 30 minutes, you can get to multiple other counties.
Sure.
And so we have no idea whether there were voluntary services or what happened in these other counties. And I know of at least, right off the top of my head, in the past several months, can think of 2 or 3 cases where people either were in another county and wound up with us, or left us and went to another county. And so it would be a tremendous tool to have.
May I ask a question, just to follow up? I know it's going to call an anecdotal response, but for the administrators, for those cases that come in as a CPS intake, suspected child abuse case, and it readily does not meet the definition, and we're obviously taking on what is child abuse, but forgo that for a minute. It doesn't meet the definition of child abuse, perhaps because we can't pigeonhole it into who's a perpetrator. Obviously, the kid's been abused in real world terms. The kid's been abused. Can you give an idea of those types of cases, how many families ask for or receive services? I mean, we have an abused kid. We can't indicate it because we might not, I don't even know if you number it even, but how many are receiving? I mean, we're really getting down about how we take care of kids here. And can you just give us some anecdote? That's right.
What we do in our county is we don't have a separate child abuse unit. We disbanded that. We got all of our assessment staff trained in forensic interviewing, but they assess all cases when they come in, whatever the reason for referral, doesn't make a difference, except with the child abuse, they're going to be doing the forensic interviewing. They'll indicate if that comes with, but they're still assessing that family for services. A lot of services we put in place immediately. We don't wait until a court hearing. We don't even wait until we develop a family service plan. We'll put services in as they're needed immediately and try to work with that family. Some of our services we provide, you don't even need to have an open case. So we can do family group decision making. I have outreach services that work with that family in the home twice a week, and we'll get those services. You don't need an open case. So it doesn't even show in our GPS assessments how many we got, but we'll get the services in there. Then we'll work with the family to try to work for voluntary services. So in a case, the scenario you gave where that child was abused, we don't know who it is, we're probably about 100% going to provide ongoing services to that family.
I'm not attacking CYS. I carry the banner for CYS. Okay? I'm looking for, in reality, candid conversation. How often do kids go without services where we know that parents may reject the service? I mean, it's not lack of effort by CYS. I'm not going there. But
What we would do is we'd go bring them into court. Even though we don't have an indicator report, we don't know who did it, we know this child, because it's the assessment going forward. This child's at risk. There's not a, this child may not be safe. Our assessments show that they're too high risk. There's nothing we can do to ameliorate it unless we provide services. Family doesn't want those services. We're bringing it into court and having the judge say,
with the
How
threat
much to get the
of dependency.
services?
With the threat of dependency.
Okay.
Well, if I could, one of the things that's being suggested is GPS services are voluntary, they shouldn't be. One of the things we should do is mandate.
They're not.
Yeah, but it does vary though, because some of us do it, and we'll go to court if need be, but there's other counties that don't, and that's part of the problem, I think. To be more consistent,
Should we change the law?
Yeah.
And so the children and youth should be able to direct GPS services and, but the
well, you gotta
practically
bring it
then
to
the
court.
key
I mean,
is
the judge-
going to be,
Yeah,
okay.
we have to bring it to court. It shouldn't be that there's no recourse. You shouldn't have to have a finding of abuse, you know,
Oh,
to
yeah.
do it.
Right.
And in GPS, you don't. But if there's, you know, it's risk assessments, safety assessments, what's going forward, is this child safe or not? And what do you have to do to make that child safe? And if not, we'll place, you know, like in a situation like you raised, we don't know who did it, but we know somebody did something to this kid, and this child's at real imminent risk. If we don't remove that child, we're going to court to remove him. Doesn't matter, it's not.
May I go one more direction? We know who did it. Doesn't fit the definition of perpetrator, okay? It's not caregiver. You do your section, your safety assessment, you find that risk is pretty low. Mom has brought in resources to surround both she and the kid, keep the kid safe. But you're not sure, is there anything in place but mom doesn't want services from you. I don't want the government involved. One of the concerns I have is that kid still is an abused child and still needs some sort of help. And that's where I'm trying to get at. Where are we in that? I know maybe it's a microcosm, maybe it's a small amount of cases.
If everyone's.
Well, I just think we need to remember that not all parents want nor need government involvement. Mark said it very early on, child abuse is a community problem, and it is. And the community has services. If we believe that the child needs help, it is incumbent on children and youth to ensure that they get the help they need. And if we believe they do, and the parent says no, then you go to the judge. And the judge then weighs the role of government intervention with the role of being able to be a parent based on what's best for that child. But
Jason's piece is an interesting
it
thing.
is,
It does get into what's the role of government. You know, a
it
child
does.
was molested, and perpetrator, you know, you couldn't prove it, you know, in a way. It was
But is
paramour.
the child
He's
safe?
now out of the house. Child's safe, but the child has been traumatized. What's
And it-
government's role in terms of, and mom doesn't want services, you know, and she says, I don't need anything from
But
you.
again, I think it.
Do we force that? And I don't think you do force
I
that. I
don't
think then
either.
you're overstepping government's bounds, you know, it's.
Unless you
that's
believe
part of
the
it.
child is going to be harmed by not having service, and then I would be the first to take it to the court
But
and
how
ask
far,
the court
you
to
know,
help.
point.
That's the difficult
Yeah.
question.
That
Is
is
the
the
child
difficult
going to be harmed?
Very
And
complex.
that's where you get into relationship.
Yes,
That's
there
where
you
it's
go.
not about the system. You can have the best system in the world, but if you don't have the right people in those positions,
There you go.
fulfilling those roles. So in that instance where you're describing, the mother says, I don't want government. Why? Why doesn't the mother want government? Do we shove it down her throat, or do we
Or
ask
we
her
help
to
her?
do
I think it's again back to research. I think there are certain children with a supportive family that might not need services and they may be detrimental for one way or another. But I think it's like parenting class. I say, how do we know we have like 500 parenting classes, which work and which don't? I think that child needs to be in the system if only to see who doesn't need therapy. Because I think the argument that every kid needs therapy might not be right. It might be right,
We've
but I don't
heard,
think it might
we've
be.
heard testimony about the increased likelihood that a victim of child abuse will there's a strong likelihood that they themselves become a perpetrator. So my concern is, where there are no red flags on immediate safety, and a parent refusing services, and that kid perhaps has a great family network, and everything's there, but they say, because we have all this going on, we're not going to get professionals involved to try to curb future conduct. That's what I'm just trying to figure out. What do those numbers look like, and should we address
We
them?
don't know that.
And,
Wait a minute, 2 hearings ago, I asked a question of some professionals who were responding to at the task force to the cases that are being brought before us. How many do we not know about? And it was in evidence that 90% of the cases of abuse in the Commonwealth, we never know about. I'm very interested in who those 90% are. Okay, that's one thing, and that was in evidence. That's in the minutes. The other that came up was I asked one of the law enforcement, or I think it was law enforcement, when you call for the child abuse hotline, do you get 100% response to 100% of the calls? And they said no. 20% of the calls never get answered for a whole lots of reasons, not the least of which is understaffing, a system that's overwhelmed, and the ability to respond. It's in the minutes. I remember those two statistics very precisely. And it seems to me that dramatizes and underscores the importance of this whole conversation. There are a whole lot of people out here who are getting abused that are outside the jurisdiction of this stuff, okay? There's a tsunami that's in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, as told to us by professionals who work in the field, the police officers, the district attorneys, the judges.